Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are here at Gamma 2019 with a good friend of mine, Patrick Day.
Hello.
Yeah, Patrick. He is the owner, partner at Uncle's Games.
Owner at Uncle's Games.
Has 4 stores in the Washington State area. But we just filmed an episode of the Covenant Cast, and we cut that off. And Paige, which is the other guest, she went on to one of the panels. And then in the aftermath of that, we were discussing a number of industry-related
like we do
things, and then about 15 minutes into that conversation realized we need to turn the cameras on and just be having this conversation. So who knows where we're going to go with this, but we're all retailers, and we're going to be talking about tabletop gaming and retail and kind of some issues and questions and things we've been dealing with across the country from each other, right? We're from Tulsa, he's from Washington State. Yep. So first thing I think I kind of want to just crack open is something I think anyone familiar with the industry, a couple of good examples recently include Wingspan, a board game recently put out by Stonemaier Games, Keyforge, a game made by Fantasy Flight Games, published by Asmodee, which is this idea.
I'm going to add a third one to the list, at least for me for the holidays, was The Mind.
Nice. By Pandasaurus.
Yep.
And so it's this idea that you order a game, if you play games, you're probably used to it in this fashion, which is you order a game, and then you find out your store didn't get nearly as much of it as they thought they were getting, and then they have to make cuts, and you either get a portion of what you wanted or none of what you wanted. Mm-hmm. In which case, like Wingspan is a board game that is just impossible to find.
Right. It's called allocation.
Do you think I would be accurate in saying that this is the conversation everybody is having in the corners of Gamma right now?
Yeah, probably.
Right?
You were talking about there was a panel.
There was a panel.
Kind of discussing this,
so we had a panel with 2 retailers. I was one of the retailers. 2 publishers and 2 distributors represented. And it was actually really conducive, but it was only an hour long, and it felt like we were just starting to really make ground when the panel had to end.
Well,
so.
it seems like it's the conversation. It's not the conversation, right? It's the frustration.
Yes.
Which is, and it's almost like we're all just so used to it.
Yes.
Where when a new game comes out that it's hard to, I remember Keyforge, and Destiny was the same way.
Yes.
Which is like early on, there's so many people, the most vocal people are saying, this game cannot succeed, it won't succeed, this is a bad idea, this is, that kind of thing. Lo and behold, it comes out, demand skyrockets, seemingly within a couple weeks or a month before the game comes out. And then there's not nearly enough to go around. Yes. An allocation happens.
So I actually have a theory related to Keyforge in that in the case of Keyforge, I think a lot of stores ordered it like they were Magic intro decks. So or you guys deal in Pokemon, like how many Pokemon intro decks will you bring in for a set? Like a couple dozen?
We don't do Pokemon.
Oh, I thought you did do Pokemon or starter.
It's kind of on our radar, to be honest with you. Maybe that's a sign of things that come.
Sorry, but those kinds of games, the intro decks, stores usually will order maybe 24 to 30 decks.
Yeah. So if you order 24 Keyforge decks, you have enough for about half a player.
And I ordered it like it was a booster pack.
Yeah.
Because it was a booster pack.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think Keyforge I want to give some retailers a little bit of a pass, only because it's such a unique, different game, different model that I don't know a lot of retailers even knew how to order for it.
Sure. And it's somewhat fair.
Yep.
Well, so let's break it down into, so this is a thing known as forecasting, right? And this is something that's been talked about for a little while now. It's becoming more...
If you can do this perfectly in the industry, you will be rich.
And here's the thing, though, is for you to forecast successfully as a retailer, the publishers and distributors have to be forecasting on the same level, or you don't end up getting the products that you bet on to begin with, right? So it really doesn't work unless everybody's on the same page.
Should we explain how it works?
Please do.
I think they know how it works. So the way that system works is that distributors... So we live in what's called a 3-tier system. It's a little archaic, but there is publishers who make the games, and then they send those games to distributors in case packs, because a lot of game stores don't want to carry 6 to 12 of something, right? And then those case packs are broken up by the distributors. The distributors, take a little money off the top, and then stores go usually now to those distributors' websites, and they pre-order. They literally go down a list of all the titles in the entire industry upcoming, and they just put in little numbers for pre-order numbers.
And one of the benefits there is that the store gets to order 1 of this game, 2 of this game, 3 of this game, 1 of this game, 2 of this game across all the publishers, and then they can basically get that in 1 shipment, pay shipping, or get free shipping on 1 thing.
Right.
Whereas obviously, even I'm thinking Stonemaier with Wingspan, it's they're not a giant publisher.
No.
He's very successful, but at the same time, it's he did his State of the Union address
Yes.
blog the other day, and it was essentially, he's talking about he's the only employee, really.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's
when customers come in frustrated with like, why are you out of scythe or whatever, it's like, you need to understand, Stonemeyer's one guy. Like, be patient.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and the point I'm kind of getting to is that like he can't ship Wingspan to 2,000 stores.
Correct.
Right. So
Yes.
distributors play a vital role in that.
Yes.
But that's the structure.
Yep.
So then, how else is this working?
Well, here's the other piece of that structure that's relevant is that the pre-orders that you're putting in as a retailer are not actually pre-orders because you're not paying for them and guaranteeing that they'll arrive.
Yes, this isn't GameStop, so I don't have to put in $5 a game for all my pre-orders. And nor are they, I kind of wonder if there was some vision in the early days of the industry that it would be like customers came in and like pre-ordered these games and then the stores then putting in those numbers. But that's not how it works, right? How it actually works is that we are putting in numbers just based on what we think we're going to be able to sell.
It's basically a request.
Yes.
I mean, this is how many
It's
I
a
would like
request.
for you to send me, and hopefully I get that many.
I think another important part of this to understand is that, as far as every conversation I've ever had with any publisher, it seems like most games take 3 to 6 months, even Stonemaier in his thing, 3 to 6 months to, once you hit print, for it to be at the retailer.
Yeah, because it has to come across on ships.
It usually gets printed in China and shipped.
Yes.
But the thing that's important to note about that when I think about something like, and I don't know the dates as well with Wingspan, but with Keyforge is that they announced it in August at Gen Con, and it comes out in November.
Yep.
So presuming it takes at least 3 or 4 months to print, they had either already hit print when they announced it at Gen Con on whatever they were printing for release, or were soon to hit print.
Yep.
So another part of the issue is even if retailers could perfectly forecast and request exactly what they wanted based on that, a lot of times they don't have, like you were saying earlier, Keyforge was so new.
Yes.
It's like they don't have enough information to actively say or accurately say, this is how much Keyforge I expect.
Right.
So where is the risk spread in the system? Because I think that's where the decisions get made. So publisher, first of all, has risk in how many units they decide to print.
Yes, their risk is no distributor basically picks up that game. Often though, a distributor is already putting in numbers roughly when they're doing a print run.
Okay.
But their risk is really like, what's the print run that I do for this game? And so there's way more risk, I would say, for new publishers because a distributor is going to deal with them differently than an established publisher.
Well, and it's like a publisher is going to have to make that number choice with very little information.
Right.
And what is the distributor going to use to determine how much of that game they're going to buy?
Yeah, and that's the real magic. But the number one thing they use currently is before that's even happening, they'll get a sales sheet from the publisher of like, what is this game? And one of the issues we really found upstairs is that the sales sheets that publishers are giving to distributors are very, very uninformative and often incomplete. And yet distributors still take those sales sheets, which is interesting. I thought that was a really interesting revelation to me, was like if a publisher gave a distributor a sales sheet that didn't have art and had one sentence for the game description and didn't even explain what components were in it, sometimes the distributor still takes that information and it plugs it in for being pre-ordered, which
so
seems like a real...
At that point, does the distributor commit to ordering a certain amount of that?
I think it depends on the relationship between the distributor and publisher.
The game, the publisher,
Yeah. But that game is now available for pre-order, right? And so now we are putting in numbers, and so the publisher is now, or the distributor is now deciding based on pre-order numbers how much of that they want.
So is the distributor numbers, essentially as kind of wavy as the retailer numbers, where like a distributor might say, let's say 2,000 units is what I think I want, but I'm not paying you 2,000 units worth of pre-order money right now? That probably
depends on the publisher.
The way that I understand it,
So
right?
one thing to really understand about the game industry is we're a small industry, and a lot of it is personal relationship and unique contracts per publisher.
Yeah.
And so there's no hard and fast rule exactly on how that works.
Even if you look at Stonemaier,
Yep.
Who has done a handful of games that have just seemed to go wild, right?
Yep.
That's kind of the expectation at this point, almost.
Yes.
So I imagine he can go to a publisher and say, or a distributor and say, if you want my game, you have to guarantee you're going to buy this much, or go ahead and buy this much. I don't know anything about that relationship, by the way. But versus first-time publisher,
Yes.
isn't going to walk in and say,
Yes.
hey, distributor, you're buying 5,000 copies of my game and you're
that
paying me
doesn't
for it
happen.
right now.
Not only
Yeah.
that, but most distributors won't even deal with a publisher unless they have at least 3 or so games.
So
They don't even want to deal with you unless you have multiple titles in most cases. And that's where there's even a weird 4th tier that exists, which is formerly Impressions and PSI. Those guys kind of play that role of being a distributor to distributors. For those smaller, most small publishers, that's how they get into distribution, as they go through those guys.
Interesting.
So the publisher essentially has risk associated with printing games that they have no way of really knowing how much is going to sell based on just like, this is how well my last game sold, this is what I predict it's going to do.
Yep.
But we're talking
Distributors blame stores. So distributors will say the problem is that you guys don't put realistic pre-order numbers in.
but part of that is being created because retailers don't have information
Yes.
to put that in time.
I mean, it makes sense how this flows, though, right? Publisher wants as little risk as possible, so they want the distributor numbers to be in before they hit print. Distributors don't want to take any risk, so they want the retailer numbers to be in before they place their order.
Yes.
So it's got to stop. So who should own that risk?
So I am willing, this is a bad thing to say, and many retailers will disagree with me. I am willing to risk betting on what is a good game as long as I get all the information I need to decide if it's a good game. In other words, I actually consider it my job as a store to figure out. Part of the reason is just because every store has different customer base.
Yeah.
And so what is a good game for me might not be good for you guys and vice versa. So I am willing to own that risk. Like I am willing to own the risk of making the bets on what games are going to do well. But I only want to own that risk if you are giving me the information I need to make informed decisions. And so that's where the publisher retailer breakdown is that, and especially if like these publishers are putting in sales sheets still have any information. I don't know, you guys have been on like Alliance or whatever and you go through your pre-orders and there's so many games where there's like no image available.
Yeah, right.
And you're like,
right.
I literally don't even know what the box art is.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a small card game or a big box
I don't
game.
know the size, the weight, etc.
I don't know anything about this game. And yet they're asking you to bet on their game for pre-order numbers. And sometimes those are the games that go big, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so kind of talking a little bit more down the chain about risk, right? So just a little summary so we can dive in.
Yeah.
Publisher, if they're printing without guaranteed orders, is risking inventory.
You could have thousands of units sitting in your warehouse.
Can be
sink
awful
your company.
because you have to store
Absolutely.
it, you paid for it.
Yes.
Yeah. Publishers, or not publishers, distributors maybe are taking risk by publishers and games they know are going to be good. They're betting on early without perfect information from retailers.
Yep.
Even as far as I'm aware, is that a retailer, right, can back out of an order pretty late in the process. So like,
Yeah, that's a little strange, right?
yeah, I mean, it's up to like maybe a couple weeks before a game comes out. So maybe a bunch
Usually
of
a
people,
retailer's not locked in until it shows up on our door, I think.
yeah, and so the
Makes sense why
distributor,
things are
right,
weird.
can take that. There's a risk there because
Yep.
like if a bunch of people put in for Keyforge in August and then by October,
Yes.
FFD announces something that everyone is like, no, this game's going to be awful.
Yes.
All of a sudden, all the retailers pull out. Now there's risk at the distributor level. Second, when we get down to the retailer, this is a really interesting one to me, right? Because so many retailers act so differently in the way they're doing
and that's
this.
part of the issue is that we're all different.
Yeah, so I get a sense, and I would love, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I feel like you're way more tapped into like how other stores are operating. That most stores are ordering games relatively late in the game, in the timeline here. And so a lot of times too, a lot of stores I assume put in for Wingspan as a clear example, less than a month before it came out.
Yes.
And then are now upset because they can't get it, right?
Yes.
And so their risk, essentially, they're risking their inventory as well, which is if I do put in for 10 copies of Wingspan and then it doesn't sell,
Yes.
that's a problem. And that happens across too many games. There's 3,000 or 4,000 games coming out a year.
Yes.
Big problem. A lot
Big
of inventory.
problem.
Here's the weirder thing to me about that, the retailer situation, where you wait until maybe a month before. First of all, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Because
There's no reason not
you
to
have
remember.
more information about the general buzz around a game, so you should wait till the very last minute.
Yep.
And secondarily, your numbers that you put in the day of lock-in are just as relevant as the person who put in 6 months
That's
before
another
you.
part of the problem.
Yeah, there's literally
be
zero
fair,
incentive to put in information.
The industry has kind of trained stores in this way because for a long time, they were asking for pre-order numbers a month to 2 months before a game came out, long after, right? And you can even see that now if you like flip through GTM or whatever. Like if you flip through GTM, most of the games, GTM is a trade magazine showing the games to pre-order. Most of the games in there, are they talking about games coming out in 8 months? No, they're talking about games that are coming out in 2 months, right?
Yeah.
And that is because for a long time, that was kind of the window. And so now a lot of game stores are trained to not even consider pre-orders until pretty late in the game.
Right.
Sure.
And so we also need to change that mentality of like, I need to be putting in pre-orders 6-8 months ahead of time. And the only way to change that mentality is what you're talking about. There has to be a penalty for not doing
or an
it.
incentive for doing it.
Or an incentive, both ways, absolutely.
Yeah. And I
Carrots are better than sticks, so you're probably right.
I think that's why I mentioned earlier the printing timeline, because it's like if retailers are putting their numbers in a month out, there's a 0% chance any publisher in the world can do anything about supply at that point.
Right.
Like the game's coming out in a month, and whatever we printed is what we printed, and that's what's going to happen. So it seems like there's a handful of issues kind of at each stage of the process. And if I just backed up, and again, the part of this too is that we're talking, hundreds of publishers.
Part of the problem is we're 3 retailers sitting in the room talking about this.
Yeah. So there's hundreds of publishers, there's a handful of distributors, and then there's thousands of retailers.
Yep.
And so like this isn't the problems aren't stemming from any one source, right?
Yep.
It's not like you can change this one thing and totally fix it. But as I was saying before we even started recording, it seems to me that, because the other risk that a retailer has, and this may be more us, and I think you share this as well a little bit, is that we do a lot of work in building communities and promoting a game and getting people excited about it ahead of release and leading into release.
Yep.
And one thing we always find is like we said earlier, putting a number in 6 months earlier, 2 weeks out, makes no difference.
It makes no difference.
And so you have something, whether it's Keyforge or Wingspan or the Mind or whatever the game is.
Yeah.
It's like you also are disincentivized from actively promoting and selling that game.
You are.
Ahead of time, because you can't do all this work to sell.
Well, you're even disincentivized for taking pre-orders for customers, because if I have like, a dozen or more in each store pre-order at least for Wingspan, but if I only get 1 copy for each of those stores, even though I according to my pre-order numbers, I have a bunch coming, but I only get 1, those customers, the one who takes that hit is me, because those customers say, I pre-ordered with you, and I pre-ordered with you like 9 months ago. Like, what the heck? Where's my Wingspan? And I am stuck in the lurch, right? And so
let's talk about
poor Wingspan.
Potential solutions, at least so we're all operating on the retail side. So what are our potential solutions?
So here's number one in my mind. And the way this conversation even started is you asked me, what are things to bring up with the new executive director of Gamma? There is only one organization that I know of in the industry that connects all of these people that we're talking about, and it's Gamma. And so what Gamma has not been, but could be, is the place where we're having these conversations with all the different tiers and figuring this stuff out together. Because it's the one place where all the distributors are there, not just a distributor, all the publishers are there, not just one publisher, all the retailers that matter are there.
Got him.
So like it is the organization that can do that. And currently, as Gamma is made up, it's the Game Manufacturers Association. So the focus had been on the manufacturers, but honestly, it's what we got. And it affects the manufacturers as much as the publishers, as much as the distributors, as much as the retailers. It's in all our best interest to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
So I really think the challenge for the new executive director is to become the place that the conversations are happening to find these solutions.
So what does that look like? Is that getting a bunch of people in a room for 6 hours and saying, we're not going to leave until we solve this problem? And
well, I mean, how do you identify the problems? How do you identify what the most important
we can identify the problems.
But like, you need a system for saying, these are the top 3 problems we need to address.
I'll say one issue that Gamma's had in the past is expecting the board to like solve everything. When what the board can do is build committees for each of these smaller detailed problems, right? And say, we're gonna build a committee and all they deal with is making sure distributors are doing sales sheets that are like better or whatever, right? Like pick the most detailed thing, pick 5 or 6 people that can really help to fix that thing, and then they can always come back to the board, come back to the executive director, come back at Gamma and present, you know?
Here's what's been going on.
Yeah, here's what's going on. These are our solutions. But where we're at right now is the vehicle where that can be happening. Because I can't, maybe there's something I'm missing, but it's the only vehicle I know of
Where
that could do it.
I mean, it's definitely the only like industry-focused event where there's this many stakeholders in the same place at the same time.
Yes, and when I say GAMA, I don't necessarily just mean the trade show. I mean the full organization of GAMA that exists year-round. But the trade show is the time where we're all together and there's not a public orientation as well, whereas Origins, there's a public
piece of that.
Yeah.
So if we could wave the wand and change a couple of things, like what are some ideas?
I know exactly what I would do.
Yeah, you can start because we had talked about this concept quite a bit.
I mean, and I'm curious to hear thoughts and critiques, all the same. But essentially, I think it's if you look at any other industry that's entertainment specific, movies are the best example to me.
Yeah.
I think there's a handful of things happening that we could learn a lot from, which is very early on. Like, I know the release, they haven't announced the name, they haven't shown a trailer, they've given us nothing, but I know the day that Star Wars Episode 9 is coming out. And Star Wars may be the exception.
I'm excited for that.
But
I
know it's coming out, and I knew the day it's coming out for a year and a half now.
Yep.
And there's not a surprise, right?
Right.
But the reality is, it's coming out, and my assumption is that movie theaters are having to make decisions on how many reels of this do you want for each of your locations way in advance. And they're probably I don't know when that is, I don't know when the cutoff is, I don't know the information they're getting beforehand, but when I apply that kind of just loose concept to tabletop, it's like, and I'll use Keyforge as a walkthrough example. Let's say it takes 6 months to print. To me, it's like 7 or 8 months out, you need to be showing this game to retailers and saying, here's what the game is, this is the release month or release date in an ideal world, coming out November 15th. Like, this is when it's going to hit. And you can put your numbers in by July 15th. And any number you put in by July 15th, you're going to get 100%.
Yeah.
We might have more past that. And if you are late to the train or you didn't order enough, maybe a month out, you can still change that. But that's the moment it's going to happen. And then not only that, but 60 days before release, here's our marketing plan. We're going to send 2 decks to every retail store for demo purposes. 2 weeks later, we're going to run. They aren't going to do this. But like movies, right? They have national campaigns and budgets going on, but there's also local stuff happening, which is theaters are hanging up posters in their theaters. They're running billboards. That's not, like Marvel necessarily paying for the billboard. It's like Cinemark or so on and so forth. But you have a loose plan of what's going to happen. And then it's like, 3 weeks out, if you want to up your number, you can try.
It's not guaranteed, but
not
you can
guaranteed.
try.
Yeah, because
you didn't take the big bet.
What that guarantee allows is that the stores that are willing to bet can safely market a product. Like, if a movie theater had to sell tickets to a release, and not sure how many reels of the movie they're going to get, that whole it would just crumble.
It would.
It's like they can't. If I got my opening night Star Wars ticket and I show up and they're like, sorry, we got allocated. Pitchforks. Like, that building's coming down. It is coming down.
And yet that's what we face on a daily basis.
And so what it's systemic though, because it's like, not only can we not schedule events, not only can we promote, not only can we start demoing and teaching people leading up to release, there's so many problems created. But then, not only that, the person that, like we said earlier, that walks in the door 2 weeks out and says, Keyforge is hot right now. Everyone's talking about it. I want 100 cases. They're treated the same as the person who 4 months ago was like, this game's going to...
I believe in this game.
I'm going to bet on this game.
And not only that, but
I'm going to do the field work to prepare for it. Like, I'm going to try and build the customer base for that.
Get them ready for it. Anyways, so then they also currently get treated the same after the fact too. So Keyforge sells out. This is the obvious winner. Everyone wants it, as you can't get it. So then every store in the country is getting these trickling supplies of a couple cases. No matter how much they bet on it or how much energy they put into it beforehand, it doesn't matter. It's just...
So there's no incentive or reward for taking that risk and then playing to that risk as a retailer.
Because if Keyforge had bombed, I would be on the hook for a lot of money. I'd been on the hook for a lot of money. So I took a lot of risk on Keyforge. But I didn't. I got the payoff for the pre-release. I got the payoff in the initial order. But once I become the only store that has it in the region, I'm still going to sell out very quickly. And now I'm waiting in line with every other store that just ordered like 3 boxes, which is what a lot of stores did, like 3 boxes of Keyforge. And so there probably needs to be a way of like showing to publishers and distributors, hey, this guy or this gal, this store took a big bet on this game. We're going to make sure that we can continue to support them, especially because for Keyforge, it's community-based. So, when we didn't have decks anymore to give out for prize or anything,
or sealed events,
or sealed events, or any of that, it was pretty rough, right? It was pretty rough, and I had worked very, very hard to build that community for our stores. And so that's definitely one thing that needs to be addressed is I'm willing, hear me publishers, I am willing to take the risk and bet on a game,
I think that's the important
but I
part.
want a payoff for doing so.
And it's important to show the other side. Now, it would be helpful if we had a publisher and distributor here as well.
Yep.
But
Go find one.
We can make that happen
they're
very
back.
easily.
So the flip side of this coin is, because you're willing to take the risk, we're willing to take the risk, right?
Yep.
I think there are a lot of retailers willing to take the risk, but we're still, right now, the system doesn't incentivize us to take the risk.
No,
It
not
says,
at all.
put in your numbers 2 weeks out and roll the dice.
So here's the question: Why is it that distributors would be willing to allocate people who are placing?
So why does
large
allocation
volumes?
happen? That's a good question.
Why
So
send 2 boxes to
the reason is because within the distribution system, there are salesmen, right? So every distributor has salesmen and they have accounts of stores, okay? So I'm a distributor salesman and I have 500 stores that are my accounts, okay? And my accounts have options. They have options to leave. You get commission, right? I get commission based on my sales as a salesman in distribution. So if I don't do a good job, they will leave me and even stay within the same distributor, but go to a different salesman. Or they will completely, even worse, they'll leave and go to a completely different distributor, right? And so I want to make sure as a salesman to make sure that I don't lose any of those accounts. And so if a game comes out and it's really hot and somebody that I want to keep as an account is like, I need this game, I know I only pre-ordered 2, but I need 20, right? The only way I can get product to satisfy that other customer is to go over to this other store that ordered 200 and say, you know what? I'm going to take 10 of your 200. But when you take 10 of their 200 over, 300 stores that all did that, right? Yeah. Suddenly, the store that bet big is allocated down to very few copies, almost to the point. I feel like we have gotten to a place mostly, there are some exceptions, where the place that pre-ordered big still gets more than the place that didn't place any pre-orders, but they're still getting a half to a third of what they knew they could handle, and these other places are basically taking that product. And the problem is for the salesman is there's no incentive for him to say to that other store, sorry, this is what you pre-ordered, maybe you pre-ordered none, you're getting none. Because he needs that account and he wants to keep that account.
Well, and it's important to note too on how many games come out that this is not a problem.
Yes.
That's the other reality is that most games, we have the other problem.
Yep.
Which is where all this comes from, I think, which is like there are more copies than anybody wants.
Right.
And so either the publisher's sitting on copies, the distributor's sitting on copies, or retailers are sitting on copies on their shelves.
Right.
But I think that's where it's like, if I had the option as a store, even if it was 6 or 7 months out, to guarantee and put in a number.
Yep.
And that's what I know I can get.
Yep.
Then 2 weeks out, they're like, if I didn't put anything in and I want 50 cases of Keyforge, then they're like, hey, sorry, we don't have any. If I was given that opportunity, then that is even, they may still not think it's fair. But it's like, if that's how the system worked, right? Yeah. But I think the other side of this that is worth pointing out as well is that for a publisher, I think, they're wanting to announce the game as close to when it's going to be on the shelf as possible, because what you don't want, or one of the risks, is that Wingspan gets announced 2 years early, and then it's like by the time it comes out, no one cares.
Right.
So it's like this adrenaline rush of we need to announce Keyforge literally as close to when it's actually going to be on retailer shelves as possible. But that obviously means if you're not...
We own some of that for leaks. Like if EA goes to GameStop and is like, I'm going to tell you about a game that's not coming out for 2 years because I need pre-orders on it, then GameStop is not going to leak that information. But one of the reasons that this is an issue in our industry is because we don't have our stuff together, right? And so there are stores that the moment a publisher would do that and say, in confidence, like NDA, here's the information, there are still stores that will leak that information.
Yeah.
And so that's part of that problem, is that we're not able to keep things to ourselves. I think there are solutions to that, and I think we could get into a room and talk about those solutions. But that's why that happens in a lot of ways.
Well, the other
and
piece
doesn't happen in other industries.
The other piece of that is kind of, so it seems consistent that one of the like general solutions is more time is needed between the very beginning of the process and the end of the process.
Or printing needs to get a lot faster.
But yeah, that could happen.
And that's one reason why I was less concerned about Keyforge than Destiny, is because I actually worked on Dice Masters. I knew how much longer it took to print dice versus Destiny, or versus cards. So
and there are a lot of questions that are much deeper, kind of like questions of what if all manufacturing was done locally, right? Is that and does the cost bear out, and is that worth it, and all those kinds of things? Because there's a lot of complaints. Why is all this stuff being made in China and shipped over? That's where a lot of the time is, and there's costs involved, and there's reasons that it has happened like that. So that's a conversation too. But there seems to be a longer timeline needed. But my question is this though: if you have a game, let's say it is Keyforge, and even if it gets leaked a year before it comes out, what's the actual hazard in that? Like,
I think the biggest risk is a diffusing of excitement.
Yeah.
Like, but my thing is like,
can't marketing do something about that though? Like, look at Star Citizen, for goodness sakes. It's what, seven
wow,
years?
You did go to the extreme.
7 years in development?
Like, think about it though. Like, if you announce Keyforge in January, let's say you announced Keyforge at GAMA last year. And every retailer gets 2 copies they get to take home, and they're all excited, and it's just fire, right?
Yeah.
But then, like, what happens if at Gen Con, some other publisher, right, it's Game Theory, is like, I have this newer, exciting thing, and it's coming out in 2 months. And like it's almost like this, like there's a fickleness to the industry.
It's true.
And I don't know if that's true. I just think that this is what is believed.
A year ago, we were all talking about God Tier, right? That's what we were all talking about. And that game still may be awesome and successful and everything, but it's not what everybody's talking about right now.
Yeah.
And so
the reason that that's a problem, and that Kickstarter kind of exacerbates that problem, these announcements don't have to be announcements.
Sure.
Right?
In the same way that we know the Star Wars Day right now.
If right now, if you came to me a year ago and you said, there's going to be a game, it's going to be sold in $10 packs. Every one of those things is going to be unique, and it's designed by Richard Garfield. How many do you want?
Right.
It's like nobody can really steal anything about that, but it's a grand mystery.
Well, and then there's buzz, which is like, what is this game they're going to be showing off at Gen Con?
Something's happening, and then it's announced officially, publicly at Gen Con. Everybody's like, this is the thing, and then it releases. But I've had 9 months to say, given the things that I know about this game, which is not how it works, but more like what it is, what category it is, the key selling points of the game.
Yeah.
Who's making it? Is there a reputation involved? Who's designing it, right?
Right. Huge.
Then I'm willing to place a lot of risk on that bet, not knowing anything else.
Does the thing to me is like, with something like Keyforge, it's very particular and it seems obvious.
It is very particular, but I also think it's maybe one of the worst examples because it's so, in an awesome way, that's why we love it.
So unique.
We've never seen it
and
before.
I think that's where like, there are those games.
Yep.
But like I'm thinking about, the reality is that 99% of what's happening in this industry is one of the 3,000 board games that comes out.
Right.
So like if at GAMA this year there were 200 board games, people were saying, here's the basics, here's who designed it, here's who whatever. How many do you want?
Well, if you don't have a unique selling proposition for your board game, then why are you publishing it, right?
Yeah.
If you're just like, I'm just going to throw it into the sea of board games and hope it gets
But that
bought,
is,
why bother?
starting with, we talked about how there was that sudden wave, like with Tabletop, that era kind of started. A lot of publishers took from that wave. What I need to do is just throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. And so there are some publishers now realizing why that's a real problem. Another issue is, so many really talented people are now interested and involved in game design in a way that wasn't true. And so it's hard for publishers because the games that they would have immediately greenlit 5 years ago, right, are now sometimes games they won't even take now. And it's just because there's been this surge of talent, coming
Good
into
games being made.
Like Clank sat on Direwolf. Direwolf made that game for digital, and they're like, we can't quite figure out how to do this digitally, and they just had it sitting around. And then Direwolf did the digital version of Lanterns for Renegade, and they were like, by the way, we like made this game, we don't know like if it's any good or anything.
And it went nuts.
Clank is now an evergreen in my store. Absolutely.
But regardless of all this, right? I think the important thing for me in this is if whatever the print run window is, if retailers were given basic information and a chance to put information in and guarantee what they're getting, even if you never take that opportunity, at least then when 2 weeks out, right? And even then, if the system prioritizes how early you're putting it in, where like the difference between putting in 2 to 4 weeks, because even 6 weeks out means that if all of a sudden a bunch of retailers are putting in, you printed 3,000 copies and you've already have 5,000 requests.
Yep.
Well, guess what? 6 weeks before it comes out, you can hit print on 2,000 more copies.
Right.
And that way you get more 2 weeks after release instead of 3 months, or whatever the timeline is.
Yeah.
So there's no incentive right now for the timeline of putting in.
No.
And I think there's just ways of rewarding that seem fairly straightforward.
They do. It just needs, there isn't an entity right now that is helping that happen. And part of that is, part of the history of Gamma is Gamma used to be in financial trouble, like big financial trouble. And so the previous executive director, a lot of his focus on what he did is just get them solvent, which he did an excellent job of. But because Gamma is the only thing that exists in that space, the new executive director, the challenge to him is to not just be solvent, but to start to be dealing with these things and being that place where we're all coming together to figure this stuff out. Because I do agree, a lot of it's really easy. But the way it feels right now, we all play board games, and I do not mind losing at a board game when I feel like it was my fault and I made the mistakes to get to that loss.
That's exactly the point.
But there's nothing worse than when you play a board game and you feel like you did everything right, but the game as it was designed was broken, and so you lost anyways, right? Like you made the right decisions. I mean, some people like that, but for the most part, most of us want to feel like the loss is ours to own. And so right now in the industry, if I bet big on something and it fails, I want to feel like I own that. And if it's big, if it does well, I want to feel like I own that. Like, for example, I pre-ordered a good amount of Orbis this year for Christmas, thinking that Space Cowboys, Splendor, right? The guys who made Splendor. This game's going to be at least decently big. Now, I didn't order a ton of it. Not like I did, like, say, for Discover, which we sold a ridiculous amount of. But I ordered a good amount for Christmas, and Orbis didn't do very well. But am I like running to Asmodee or running to Alliance yelling at them about, I got all this Orbis? It was my fault, right? I bet on that game, and it didn't do what I thought it could do. And it was my job to be informed about that game and make that decision.
Well, and what's not sustainable is when you take the Orbis bet and it doesn't pan out, now you're paying for it, right?
Yep.
But then you take the Keyforge bet.
Yep.
And
it also doesn't pan.
You get to
it sells, but it doesn't pan out.
You
in a
get
positive
to
way.
the release date, and it's like, well, instead of actually getting the 100 displays that you ordered, you're going to get 10.
Yep.
And so the 2 months of effort you built into getting your people excited and involved and showing them the game and stuff was literally, you spent that time and money for nothing.
Right.
And also now you have no upside. So it's like, at some point, the retailer is never having upside.
Correct.
To cover the losses of being taken and the risk in the other places. Eventually that breaks down.
Yeah, and it's really bad when a game doesn't do well for us, because usually if a game doesn't do well, it isn't doing well everywhere, and the next step that you will see is that game will be deeply discounted online. So you take a double hit when a game fails, in that I have that game is not selling, and now that game is selling online for like half off or something. And so there's a lot of risk, and that's why the most important job for store owners a lot of times, or whoever is the buyer in your store, is just figuring out what those games are, right?
Well, it sounds like so if we could kind of put this in a box, injection of certainty across pretty much the entire chain is needed. Retailers are probably more willing to take risk than maybe publisher distributors thought they were, or believe that they are.
Or at least the retailers are willing to take, there are retailers
willing
to take the risk.
Yeah.
So why not create a scenario where the ones that are willing to take a bet,
have the opportunity.
have the opportunity
And
to
that's
bet.
why I recommended on one of the forums, like, why doesn't a distributor just do a beta system and say, okay, we're going to try this out with these like dozen retailers or whatever and see if it works.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work, it was a beta. It didn't work.
Yeah.
But if it does work, then you start rolling that kind of stuff out. And part of the thing is the industry's so old. In a lot of ways, we're just doing what we've always been doing, and that's just not going to work going into the future.
It sounds like we need a lot more lead-in time in general. It also sounds to me like we can have information about games.
Which, that's amazing you say that, because most publishers think that's not what stores want.
Really?
Yeah.
Start crying.
More time to plan? I mean,
But that's what they think.
So more lead-in time, and then we need information about games that doesn't have to be terribly revealing, and it doesn't need to be announced publicly or made a big deal of.
Well, treat us like a business. That's one of my issues is I want to be treated as an adult and as a business, right? And so don't market to me like a customer. I mean, I am a customer in a way, but market to me like I'm another business person. And show me the thing I'm going to be selling, give me the details, treat me like an adult, right? And then I will, take that information and do adult things with it, be professional with it.
One thing I want to mention on that note, Stephen, is that, and I agree, being treated like an adult is a nice thing. But the reality of maybe the publishers aren't wrong, and maybe most stores actually want less lead-in time. Because most stores, and this is very hypothetical, but maybe it's that most stores don't want to put a number in until 2 weeks out.
Absolutely.
When they know that
no reason.
Customers are excited or not, when customers are willing to do it, so they don't have to take any risk ever, right? And maybe it's just that, because I do think that...
And they look the same. You know what it is that store that only got 2 copies, right? Or 1 copy, and my store that got 4 or 6 copies, to most of the customers, we look like we did the exact same things.
Yeah.
Right? We took the exact same actions.
Yes.
Well, and like maybe the reality check is that, because we're thinking, right? Like with Keyforge, right? We wanted to start... We're thinking, yeah. we wanted to start building that community as soon as we heard about it, right? It's like our whole thing is like make it easier for people to get into these communities.
Yep.
And it's like, this is a game that is $10 to get a full card game experience. And it's super fun.
Yeah.
It's like, this is the dream, right?
It is the dream.
And so we're like, man, we want to go. We want to make this a huge community here. But then it's like, and we're also not sure how much we're going to get. So we don't know how, because we have employees and we pay those employees, right? And we invest our time in this. And so it's like, we don't know how much we can actually invest in this. Because if we...
It's scary.
If we invest
it's really scary.
more in promoting and selling the game than the possible feasible return we're going to get on the product we get.
Yep.
That obviously doesn't work, right, in the long run. So, but it could be that we're just strongly in the minority of people who actually want longer lead-in times and want guarantee. Like I want to put in 8 months in advance, and I want to have 8 months from like. If you could tell me the games that are coming out in September, October, November, December this year, and we could right now start planning the events and the support and the leagues and the communities and stuff. I would love that.
Yep.
Yeah,
but I don't.
We wouldn't like launch it now, but we'd start planning behind the
Yeah,
scenes
yeah,
to be
exactly.
ready.
But I get the sense that a lot of stores are working a lot more like just retail stores, which is stock the products that are being asked for and that are hot, and like whatever's coming out this week, I want to order 3 to 10 copies of, and I'm going to sell my 3 to 10 copies, and we're going to move on to the next product.
And that can still exist. It can exist alongside people who are interested in making much bigger bets and getting a much bigger return.
Yes, right? I agree. And that's what I think we need to do is let that still happen, but there needs to be more incentive to do things more professionally and more advanced.
If you did have that longer lead-in time, and the store's willing to take the bets on the games, right, and they guarantee they're going to buy it, to me...
Part of that is I need to know when it shows up too.
Yeah, you need to know what...
Because that was the issue with the Mind is it didn't show up till after Christmas when I was told it would show up before Christmas.
That's a big deal.
Yes.
But if you guarantee you're going to buy it, and in that case, you could have things built in where it's like, well, this is your eject clause. We're not holding to this anymore because as long as this comes out by release...
clause.
Yeah, right?
Even just the publisher saying, this is the release date.
Yep.
And if we miss this release date, you are not held to the number.
Right.
So that's their incentive to hit that release date.
Absolutely.
Right? Make that happen. But whatever the number that gets put in 7 months, 8 months in advance, right? To me, it's like, well, you order that, and then you also order
General supply.
normal stuff. So that all the stores that are 2 weeks out, Keyforge is a big deal.
Yes.
can get some,
Yeah.
because that's good too. I mean, you want stores to all the possible communities to be built for this as possible.
Absolutely.
But right now, it's like it makes more sense, and this is the slippery slope, right? It's like, well, at some point, do we just stop all the pre-work and like start ordering 2 weeks in advance anything that's popular and doing?
You might. The problem is that from a customer viewpoint, you would not look any different.
Yeah.
And that's actually the real problem.
Yeah.
From a customer standpoint, you would just be another store that's sold out of KeyForge, but they're all sold out of KeyForge. So,
but on the back end, I think it looks a lot different, right? Which is
Absolutely.
like, because I know what's going to happen inevitably, right? At some point in the future of KeyForge, all the stores that are also right now getting 2 to 3 to 4 cases a week or every couple of months of KeyForge right now, 50% of those aren't going to sell KeyForge in 2 years.
yes.
And they don't care because they're going to be selling whatever's hot.
I mean, I hope they are. I hope KeyForge personally is so successful they are.
I would also
it's
love that to
quite
be the case.
possible.
But like historically speaking, they sell it while it's hot.
Yep.
And then they're gone because they're not focused on building a community. They're focused on selling a product.
Right.
And they're going to sell the least risky, highest return product every time.
Yep.
And the system right now is almost inherently built for that.
Yeah, singles.
Right? But the system is kind of built around that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty easy to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another issue to keep in mind, it's weird because I'm a retailer, but I'll defend everybody. I'll defend the publishers. I'll defend it. Is that we are financially, every company is like just making it by.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these publishers literally can't afford to set street dates because they need that money ASAP. And I can give a perfect example where there is, I'm going to do this as anonymously as possible, but there was a company that is an established publisher and they were looking to sell. And I have a friend of mine who is wealthy because video game industry and stuff, and he got to look at their books and consider buying that company. And when he looked at their books, he saw that if a single container ship coming over from China was like 2 months late, that company was going to go out of business, right? And that kind of stuff happens. Like that happens. There's strikes, there's whatever happens. And so a lot of these publishers are like almost like in a living paycheck to paycheck sort of situation where the moment they get that product, they want to get it to distributors, they want to get it on store shelves because they need that check as soon as possible. And so that also is part of the dilemma for a lot of these publishers. And part of it too is because they're coming over on container ships from China, the window is very vague, right? Because what happens is they basically just keep putting product in one of those containers until it's full, and then they put it out.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you are the unfortunate person who gets your product put in at very early on that container ship, like it might be waiting a month even before it's filled up and it comes across.
And then it can get caught in customs or
exactly.
or whatever.
Oh yeah, and
I-
customs is a whole nother problem.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out as well that the system is working how it's working.
Yep.
Usually for a lot of really good reasons.
Yes.
Like it didn't just chaotically happen, right?
I
It's
mean,
like,
well,
in some
Some of
cases,
it did.
it's like it's not like publishers don't want to sell more.
I'm
going
going
to
to take people completely off the hook.
Yeah, but I mean, like
Yes.
they may not be good reasons.
Yes.
But like,
Yeah.
I don't
Decisions
think
were made
I don't think
for a
people are
reason.
actively out there being like,
There's a lot of
I hope this
reactive.
goes poorly. You know,
Yes.
like it's not intentional. But the reality around it is like, it's not quite working,
Yeah.
and it could be a lot better.
And that's, I think, where everyone has a sense that things are changing, right? I mean, the consumer base is growing significantly. I think new models are starting to pop up. It's more serious than it has been, I think, on the fiscal side, the business side of things. We see a lot of, like big level investment going on.
Yep.
And so this is kind of like almost the block between what could be just hundreds of thousands of new players and the industry as it stands now.
Yep.
And there's just a couple of big problems that need to be solved, and then it probably can happen.
Yep.
Right?
And it has to happen. And you know why it has to happen is because what's easier for you as a publisher, to deal with all that mess or just sell it on Amazon,
Yeah.
right?
Or Kickstarter,
Or
right?
Kickstarter, whatever. And so one of the reasons you see so much online and so much on Kickstarter and everything is it's like this problem has gotten so bad that it's kind of pushed things out in other directions that are easier to deal with so that publishers can get those same sales.
Yeah.
So
Now,
The accordion knot.
You mentioned one thing, and this may be the end of this.
yeah,
well,
this
longer than
ramble
yeah.
that maybe was interesting for people.
It's something that I have felt for a while.
Yeah.
And it started actually with Star Wars X-Wing.
Yep.
Because I remember that game got announced, and I'm a
Yes.
huge Star Wars fan. That was the first Star Wars game in like 7-8 years. It was super exciting. And miniatures was also a category of games I had kind of just avoided because it putting it together,
We
gluing
were
it.
like pre-painted,
Yeah,
and it
so
looks good.
Pre-painted, it looks good. It looks
45-minute gameplay.
all the things you hit right.
Check.
But the thing is, I remember opening it up and I'm holding these TIE fighters and these X-wings, and I'm like, this is remarkable.
Oh yeah.
This is, and then you're looking, it's like, this is $15.
I
Look at
know.
the model and the base and the cards and the cardboard and all the design time and all the manufacturing. And then you go online, and the number of people that are saying it is ludicrous they are charging $15 for the ship. Like this is too expensive. It's like in my head, I'm just like,
That's like free in Games Workshop money.
I've seen a $30 Games Workshop model that is an inch high,
Yeah.
not painted, in spruce,
Yep.
one model. Anyways, so the thing for me is I've always had a sense, and I'm curious of your take on this, that in general, tabletop games are grossly underpriced.
Yes, and well, so they are underpriced, but it's because that's what consumers expect them. What the real issue is that the price hasn't really risen much. And so we are still charging the same prices for like games that we charged in the late 90s. And so that is a thing that is rough, but then because people will discount online, we're kind of stuck where we are. But that's the real reason, is that I remember it used to be a long time ago, video game industry is also going through this actually, but a long time ago, video game industry used to charge $50 pretty much for every video game.
Remember that.
And then remember
Every
they
time.
jumped it up to 60,
Yeah.
right? What you didn't know was going on behind the scenes is those $50 games originally had teams of like 10 people making those games.
Mm-hmm.
When they made that jump, it was when they were starting to have teams of like 2,000 people. You had to pay some payroll, right? Now, granted, more games were selling, but they still needed, and they're actually back at that place right now. Now the teams are so large, but they're still charging $60 a game. And so their solution to that is don't go through retailers, start selling direct online and get more margin. So they don't have to up the price, but they still need to be making more money, and so they're finding the way to make
Which
more
is the
money.
same thing about Kickstarting now, or
Yep.
selling directly to consumers now.
Yep.
And so that's where, like, to me, I just look at any given board game and the amount of components and art and design time and publishing and marketing, and you go down the list, and it's just like, and it seems like it's kind of a game theory thing going on, right? Which is like, people are willing to, they love this hobby, as they should, and they're willing to, from every position in the hobby, to get in and to do this. I think a lot of people are willing to make sacrifices, to make less money, to be treated less professionally, etc.
Absolutely.
And so then what happens, though, is that I'm a publisher.
Don't come
I'm
in
not
this
actually
industry
a
if you're
publisher.
trying to be rich.
Yeah.
I know a few, but they're very rare.
So let's pretend we're all three publishers.
Yep.
We all have a board game, right? And by all standard means of the world, we should be charging $150 for this game for it to be viable.
Yep.
But then Patrick comes in and he says, hey, I'm willing to charge $99 for my game.
Yes.
So then they're sitting on the shelf next to each other, and they look pretty similar, and they're in similar boxes, and they have similar things.
Yep.
Obviously, price is a major factor for consumers. So you're likely to sell more of your game.
Yes.
And so you might achieve volume, which
Yes.
maybe with enough volume, you would get to the point where you're making more money.
Totally worth it.
But then because you went down, Steven's like, well, I'm going to go to 89, right? And then when he's hiring his designer.
Which is the reverse of how inflation's going one way and we're going this way.
So Steven says I'm going to charge 89, but that also means he knows I can only pay my designer this much.
Yep.
I can only do this much, and this much. And then I'm like, I have you guys figured out, $49 for my game, and I'm going to sell all the games.
Yes.
Right? But then what happens is when you have hundreds of publishers who are all using price as a major competitive factor, right?
Yes.
And publishers know that distributors are looking at the price, retailers are looking at the price when they're deciding how many to buy.
Yes.
Same with the consumers and so on. And you have a situation where, like, technically, if everyone in the industry right now that makes games, and this is price fixing, so don't do
Price
this.
fixing,
was like, hey, let's charge double. Let's just immediately double the
We
price.
literally
of
can't have that
everything.
conversation.
It's like, but the reality is that, like, if one publisher just start charging a whole bunch more, it's like, that probably doesn't work out.
Yes.
But in the meantime, it's like, as consumers, as a player of the game, right?
Yes.
It's like, you have to understand that right now, I mean, it's bizarre, but it's like,
bizarre.
So many people in this industry are, and this is a big problem in the industry, and I don't know how to fix it, and because you can't talk about price fixing, I don't think
I'll tell you how a lot of publishers are fixing it.
You got to compete on different factors.
A lot of publishers are fixing it just by putting the same game in bigger boxes. That's how they're doing it.
Wow.
You're opening more. Be honest, audience. You're opening more and more games where you're like, this could have probably gone in half the size box, but because that box size feels like a different priced game.
Yeah. Well, we have one more question. I have one for you, Patrick, because Zach and I have probably talked about this many times, and actually all of us in here have. So let's look at what some might consider the Armageddon scenario. Let's say all board games are moving through Amazon and Kickstarter. Let's say the whole system crumbles, it's gone.
Yes.
What happens to tabletop gamers?
One of the cool things that we talked about on the previous recording that we did is that tabletop gaming is a place where people come together, and it's a community activity. And so if I moved to Oklahoma, I would not know anybody, and I guarantee the first thing I would do within 2 weeks is come to your guys' store, because I already know you, but even if I didn't know you, I know I would build some human relationships instantly and start to build some friendships, which is just a thing that it's very hard to do nowadays, right? And so that would evaporate. That's just a societal good, okay? That's one thing. But second of all, these games would even become more. Publishers, I don't want to name names, but they are blaming consumers right now for the fact that games are flashes in a pan, that basically a game sells for 2 weeks and it goes away. But that would get dramatically worse if you took local game stores out of the equation. What would happen is whatever anybody was talking about on Twitter today would sell, and it wouldn't sell tomorrow. And that is very, very bad for publishers, because publishers can't do print runs on those kinds of numbers. Even a game that sells like crazy for a single day or a weekend or whatever, which is how a lot of video games go, actually. Publishers, the other issue that we deal with that like video games don't deal with is we have physical things that have to be built and crafted and made, right? And so physical things have to be made in large quantity, right? In order for them to be cheap enough to manufacture. It's just basic economics. And so that whole system would crumble if suddenly every single game is just a 1 week release, and local game stores are the ones that basically build that tail for those games and are often the place that people are even discovering about those games that aren't like keyed into Board Game Geek or whatever. Like I spend all day, every day in my stores, because we're in malls, like introducing people to games. People don't come into my store as much as probably a lot of other stores and say, I want this game. More often they come in and say, I want a game that involves storytelling or something. Do you have anything like that, right? And so there are so many games that would never even be found if local game stores weren't there, because we're the ones that are making those matches. And I just think it's a huge part of the business too. Like, I just don't think distributors or publishers could survive. Distributors would be done. And I don't know that publishers could survive with that cut of like creating the longevity they need for their print runs.
Right.
Well, it's kind of crazy to me. Like, people now own tons and tons of games. Not like one or two, but tons and tons of games.
I've seen the shelves.
That are still in shrink wrap.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like crazy.
Yeah, understand. Well, there you have it. So thank you guys so very much for joining us for all of this. If you're a retailer or a publisher or a distributor, we don't need to know. You can be anonymous as you like. Or if you have thoughts on this exact thing, this kind of candid discussion, I think, is something that we really enjoy having, and that needs to be happening more often in the industry at large. So please share your thoughts with us on any comments that you like, YouTube or Facebook, wherever you are. And we hope to continue this conversation not only here, but at GAMA in the future, and maybe at GAMA all around the year. And hopefully, year after year, we can certainly make some progress and bring more ideas to the table. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep playing.